Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Basil Considine, and we're here from the ACU Online Writing Center for identifying an issue, how to write about a problem, in this case, in your local community, using an assignment from HCAD 441 as an example. Before we dive in, if you're not familiar with the Online Writing Center, we would work with students at any point in the writing process, and you can come to us through webinars like this. You can send us emails, and if you want detailed feedback on a piece of writing, you can sign up for either an email appointment where you sign up for a specific time, upload your paper and any special requests for feedback by the appointment time, and we send you feedback within 24 hours. Or you can sign up for a Zoom appointment where we meet in real time and you get your feedback then. If it's just a quick question about how to format a particular reference or see if you've quoted something correctly, things like that, that's usually something really fast to do by email. So just send an email to onlinewritingcenter@acu.edu. But if you want feedback on paragraphs or pages, I'd suggest signing up for an appointment. If in doubt, send us an email, because the worst thing that can happen is we'll say, oh, here's the next appointment, or we signed up an appointment for you, and just send us your stuff and we'll go from there. So let's talk about our objective here. We are going to be first looking at an assignment in HCAD 441. And before we go any further, I'd like you to take a look at this slide and see if you can spot the typographical error. I mentioned this because a leading cause of students losing points is not getting the ideas down, but small, easily correctable things like punctuation or grammar, that if you run a spelling and grammar check or use tools like Grammarly, it can help you identify them. In this case, if you ran a spell check on the slide, it would identify this comma here. And so let's take that as a reminder to always look for opportunities to make sure you don't fall into this trap, especially if you've been writing late at night or working hastily on a lunch break. So that's easy enough for us to fix once our attention is being called to it. Let's get started with thinking about this assignment and our primary objectives. So with this assignment, we are looking at a course from HCAD 441, and it's specifically talking about new health policy needs. And a new health policy need should be something that is timely, that there is action required, that has not been solved or solved in the particular context. We're going to talk about that assignment, how to break down some of the things it's asking to do, talk about how to identify and describe an issue in academic writing, and how to describe personal thoughts and feelings in APA 7. So let's take a look at that assignment. Now, this is coming from the Introduction to Epidemiology course. The same principle will apply if you're writing about a public health matter in one of our nursing classes, in our healthcare administration, and many other programs. So we can see that the assignment description begins with a preamble, saying the purpose of this is to apply knowledge of health issues and health policy to a present community, meaning something that's happening now. This is different than, say, if I was describing yellow fever in the 19th century. There's a lot of different things that apply now, like our knowing that mosquitoes spread that and are having a vaccine that works, as well as drugs that can help patients out. And then we have a brief overview of the instructions. Use your newfound knowledge of health and health policy to address a health-related issue in your community. Now you have two choices for the writing style. You can choose to write a persuasive newspaper editorial or a health policy brief to argue in favor of a new public health policy. And there's a suggestion to look at the week's readings and resources. Now, I say that's a suggestion because there are other sources that you can cite, but if you were to look at the reading list for the assignment, you could certainly do the assignment without any additional readings. And then we can see here that there is a list of different steps that this assignment should include, regardless of whether you pick the editorial or the health policy brief. And you can see that these steps are numbered 1 through 6 in this case. And let me say that the best, most recommended way, both talking with instructors for this course and my advice as a writing center professional, is to follow the order here. First of all, this is a very logical order. It builds up, it introduces the reader to this thing, and it is also the order that your professor will be following when they grade your paper. So if they have to jump back and forth to find that you say, explained why the policy is necessary, and they're not finding it after you propose the policy, or not finding it immediately after that, that is A, harder to follow, and B, might lead to your not being marked as having done that thing. And that's important because when we look at the rubric here, we see that it is essentially saying, hey, here are all the things that you are supposed to be doing. We'll come back to the rubric. Now, I want to point out that besides these 6 tasks, identifying the issue, summarizing what it is, so give us more detail on that, proposing a new policy, explaining why it's necessary, using epidemiological reasoning, so talking about, not just the individual, but the larger population level, what do the numbers show, do studies suggest, that there should be a clear call to action summarizing, okay, what are you recommending that the people who can do something about this do? And within that, we have the task of writing all this in 500 to 750 words. So that's roughly 2 full to 3 full double-spaced pages, minimum of 2 references. So you should have citations for these sources. If you are going to be getting additional sources beyond what is in the reading list for that, there's a recommendation to use our library portal. And then some notes here in what I call the, hey, if you really want to do this, the easiest, most clear, straightforward, and highest graded thing, remember that your target audience may not have your level of expertise. So try and avoid unnecessary use of jargon and use data and real life examples to strengthen your argument and make it relatable. So that real life example means you can use things like an example that you found in news coverage. You could use a personal anecdote, but that should be in combination with the larger data. And that this last one, an opportunity to make a meaningful impact in your community. It's if you're in this major, if this is a professional track that you are pursuing, absolutely, I would recommend that you make this about something in a community, either that you have a personal connection to or that you want to have a professional connection to, because you will have more interest in the topic and you'll be able to write not just from data, but also from the heart. And that's far more interesting than writing about something that you have to do additional information for and doesn't really interest you. Now, looking at the rubric, we'll see that we have some guides for how much space to use in each of these sections. So if we look at the numbers here, of course, you do need to briefly summarize the health-related issue. That's around 10% of the points. But if we look at the next one, that's double the points, 20 points. So that should be a larger section, which we'd expect if you're describing the policy, it should be longer than this brief summary here. And we can see that the greatest amount of credit here is given for outlining the policy in more detail than it was originally introduced, justifying it, and backing that up with data and references to research. Now, let's talk about some ways to identify and describe an issue. And we're going to walk through each of those 6 components in the instructions here. But first, let's talk about what the general goal is. When you're describing an issue, it's often helpful to think about it in terms of identifying some key pieces of information. Who has the issue? What is it? Where does it exist? When will this become an issue, or how long? And let's say you're looking at, say, the spread of African killer honeybees in the United States. They're working their way north, but it's very different if you're looking at trying to prevent the reaching an area versus trying to address the problem in an area where they're very well established. Why or how it's an issue, or why or how that is worth addressing, can also significantly change the course of things. If we're going back to bees here, if we're talking about the why, you could be using very different sets of data if you're talking about, say, the impact on agriculture or the very real personal dangers if, say, someone disturbs a hive and they're stung by lots and lots of bees. Now, we can also restate those things and look at it as saying, okay, you need to describe the problem or issue, tell us who is being affected by this, what are the key bits of context about this place or what makes it significant or notable in this place that it should be addressed here. Talk about the impact analysis, who will this affect? How much will it affect them? How severe is it? What are the root causes or why hasn't this issue been addressed before? Or what's making it keep being an issue? And the importance and rationale for whatever policy you are proposing to try and make the issue less pressing, less present, etc. So let's talk about each of these steps with the precept of you want to mirror the wording to make it very clear you are doing that specific thing that you've been asked to do here. So step one, issue identification, exploring the problem. The instruction says, begin by selecting a health-related issue in your community that you're passionate about and believe needs attention. It could be at the city, state, or national level. Yeah, and if it's your community, we're probably not talking about a international level. Although if you were, say, in a small country in, let's say, Western Europe, that might be something where you're near the border or something like that. But in most cases, you will want to keep this of this appropriate scope for 500 to 750 words, and it's probably not going to be international then, because that's a much more complicated situation. So just as the instruction says, issue, community, it's helpful to use that wording in your response and use phrasing like, an important health issue affecting my local community is, and then whatever it is. Or a major public health issue affecting the state of Texas is, but. And by the way, if you are describing your local community and referencing it, make sure you have a sentence that either tells us the exact name and or things about it so we can see where it is, how large it is, or who lives there, and other things like that. Like a significant personal health issue in my hometown of this place is whatever it is. So as an example, I lived in the city of Beaverton, Oregon. I can say, oh, a significant personal health issue in my hometown of Beaverton, Oregon is the increasing isolation of elderly residents who develop severe depression. Okay, I've said where it is down to the city level, and I've identified who in that area, and then it would be natural to expand in the next step on talking about things like the extent, the significance, the consequences, etc. Which brings us to that, okay, now we need more information, more detail, summarize the issue, and as it says, make it clear to the reader what's going on. So to read the instruction in a brief and clear manner, explain what the health-related issue is. Assume your readers are not experts, so use everyday language and avoid jargon. Define terms if specialized language is needed. And so fundamentally, this is going to have sentences like, this thing is that thing. For example, type 2 diabetes is a metabolic health problem in which the body does not use insulin correctly to manage sugar, leading to many secondary problems. Citation. In El Paso, Texas, 15% of the population has diabetes, most of which is type 2 diabetes. Citation. As a result, diabetes has become, and then you'd expand on things for your local context. Now, in this particular case, El Paso, Texas happens to be the 10th highest, is in the top 10 cities in Texas for diabetes rates. And if we were to segment that population by adults, it's a much higher percentage of adults. And so you would, if you were writing about that particular thing, you could tell us more about the specifics, cite sources that have said, hey, this is a major health problem, talk about the history of trying to address it, and things like that. Or you could relate it to the national and say, oh, yes, the Center for Disease Control has said this about it, has recommended this, etc. And there are many things like that that you could cite, far more than would fit into a 3-page paper. So just keep in mind, most of these claims that you're making will only need one citation to back them up, not 3. All right, now propose a new policy. That is to say, suggest a solution that isn't keep doing what we're doing right now. It could be give more money for that. It could be expand that. But whatever you're doing, outline the new public health policy you recommend be used to address this issue. And don't just say it briefly, tell us how it would work and what changes it would be bringing about. And so that would, for this, you want to make sure that your language clearly shows that you're making a recommendation. That could be like, I recommend that the state health department invest blah, or public healthcare workers should be trained to identify these warning signs of, or an effective strategy for this is that, and therefore we should use blah, or therefore this entity should institute this, or school should increase exercise programs, or whatever it is that you are advocating as the new policy to address this. Step 4, explain why this is necessary, or build a case for what you are recommending be done. And this can be summarized as justification. This is the why this is important. And the more specific examples or statistics that you can do, which can include referring to successful implementations, will help you show that this can make a positive impact and is likely to. And with this, the most important thing to remember is that you should back up your claims. And there are different ways to do that. But you want to have clear argumentation, evidence, and citations to show that the information is coming from a traceable source. And if you're echoing other people's arguments, to show that others have made those claims and it's not just you. Now, if you're making an emotional argument, let's say that you're arguing, let's see. Okay, here's a health topic from the last couple years, arguing about whether insurance should cover very expensive Alzheimer's drugs that have limited efficacy or are just plain very, very expensive. You could very well make a very strong emotional argument using ethics about quality of life and responsibility and things like that. And in that case, you might be referencing some of the authors or the philosophies that you're talking about, or referencing other people who have made similar claims, which will be very different if you were making an argument that, oh, this will save money, or this will save lives, or something like that. Now, because Abilene Christian University is a religious institution, and because many people are as well, you could be writing for an audience where that is an important factor. And so you can make an ethical argument as Christians and refer to things like scripture. You could refer to statements from religious entities. So, for example, if you were Catholic, you could refer to the National Conference of Catholic Bishops statements. If you belong to a mainline Protestant denomination, say the United Methodist Church, you could refer to a church official statement on that, the Southern Baptist Conference, et cetera, et cetera. It depends on the kind of argument you're making, but if you're making a religiously grounded argument for part of this, then it makes sense that you would cite that kind of source. But you probably want to have a multi-pronged argument with multiple types of evidence because you'll have a diverse readership. And a argument that is grounded in multiple ends, it becomes less important that they agree with you on everything, so long as they agree with your overall argument. And if you're doing a discussion of reducing medical spending, of course, you'd want to cite sources related to that. And if you're having trouble finding sources for this, I strongly recommend making contact with our ACU online librarians, because you can not only chat with them during business hours and early evening, but you can also send them an email saying, hey, I'm trying to find sources on this. Here's what I've tried. can you recommend something? And they will send you some suggestions. Epidemiologic reasoning. This is talking about particular types of data, not about individual anecdotes, not about case studies, talking about larger population levels. Okay, let's make this something with numbers and make sure since this instruction says epidemiological reasoning and how data and research support your argument, that's a very specific instruction. So make sure you have that and cite it. And that could be something like, oh, repeated measles outbreaks in Brooklyn, New York, CDC 2024. Okay, you're identifying where that information came from. Or you could be referring to a specific article, like hand washing campaigns to reduce RSV transmission in this context have led to significant decreases in, presumably, you'll be writing about upper respiratory infections. And then, of course, we have the citation. So it's not, you're saying, oh, a hand washing campaign, I think would do it. It's saying, oh, a hand washing campaign and has been found to do that in the specific instance where Bardsley et al. Are writing about that. Now, we're coming to the culmination, step 6. And before we go any further on this, I would like to call your attention to what the rubric has to say about how many points are assigned to step 6. So step 6, that call to action, it's if you leave it out, that is the difference between an A and a B, or a B and a C. But compared to the other sections, it's relatively smaller because, again, it's a 1 to 2 sentence call for action. So make it good and make it clear. Now, if we look at the specific instruction, okay, we want to make sure that it is clear that we are doing that recommendation. And so you want to use words that we recognize clearly as that, like should. For example, you might say, oh, the Abilene-Taylor Public Health District should, whatever you're recommending, in accordance with recommendations by this author for whatever it is you're talking about. Now, just to be on the safe side, I recommend making sure you have a 2-sentence call for action. Start with a brief summary and then expand with additional details. Let's pick something that is spreading through Texas right now. Snow. We don't normally have a lot of snow in Texas, but this week a bunch of snow dropped and it's been snarling things up. So, all right, your public health recommendation could involve how to deal with severe winter weather. And so you say, okay, they should do X. Maybe your policy is that they should do checkups on senior citizens. All right, great. So tell us in the second sentence more about what that would look like. Now, I don't know what issue you will pick, but again, give us your recommendation in the short form and then expand. We call this the general to specific. And if people know generally what you're talking about, they'll be more able to understand specifically that when you come in with more details next. All right, we're going to finish here with a discussion of personal thoughts and feelings in APA 7, because in this paper, the instructions do have some provision for describing your personal thoughts and feelings. And when you are talking about this, it says, oh, your persuasive editorial or health policy, and it says that you can refer to your community and you can use anecdote to ground it. I wouldn't recommend all of your evidence being anecdote because this does ask that you write about epidemiology, but that's fine. If it's a component of your larger argument, great. And often a personal anecdote is a really helpful thing in convincing people who are on the fence about something. All right, so with that, let's wrap things up with some discussion about how to write about your feelings, your thoughts, your experiences. So it is a common misconception that APA 7th edition doesn't allow you to make personal statements. What it does is it discourages the overuse of personal statements when it becomes distracting and not actually adding more information. Now, if I say, oh, in my time as an EMT, I frequently saw X. Okay, that's giving some relevant information. If you wrote that without the I, well, an EMT who looks rather like me, who had this experience, and I'm not going to tell you if it's me or not, that's just not nearly as helpful as just saying, oh, I saw this. I did that. In my 7 years of work, I observed this. And so you might be writing, I believe that X, I in my life have repeatedly seen whatever that is. Oh, my local community of blah has a significant problem of this. This problem was documented by this person. And in my experience as a first responder, whatever it is. Now, again, this is going to depend on the thing that you do, and it may be informed by something that's more hyper local or a local issue that is representative of a larger problem. And it doesn't even need to be something that has to do with, say, infectious disease or something like that, because a public health issue can be something where there's a very timely aspect. Every year in my local newspaper, around Thanksgiving time, there are editorials that they run about public health issues. One of which is, if you're going to be deep frying your turkey, please, please, please defrost it before you put it in the fryer so it doesn't explode. And that is something where the timeliness is very important because the vast majority of Americans aren't cooking a whole turkey outside of Thanksgiving. And so that local level is representative of a larger issue. And if you had an experience that you had seen that in the local community, it becomes more relevant to your audience if you're talking about them. Hey, I've seen this happen here. This is a problem both from this data, and let me tell you a story that you will hopefully hear and say, oh, I really don't want that to happen. Yes, I'm going to make sure we do that. And I don't know, again, what the exact issue that you'll be describing is, but a well-timed I statement can be a great way to anchor a larger issue. And if we talk about writing as the hook and anchor process, the hook is a way that if you use a personal anecdote as a hook, it's a great way to get the reader interested and to read the rest of the piece. That's all we have time today for this particular webinar. So if you have any questions related to that topic, please feel free to send us an email at onlinewritingcenter@acu.edu. You can go to my.acu.edu and select the Online Writing Center group and schedule an appointment or bookmark our appointment site directly. And again, please feel free to drop into webinars like this. Thanks for joining us.